Welcome to TradeNBI.com. This is John's reports for the 16th of February. Well, coming off that 23%, tiny little dip, but then proceeded to explode back up over the 38%. As we saw, this is what I was talking about, that need for white to have gotten over magenta or a exchange where the pivot of magenta. Now, magenta pivoted up, did not cross yellow yet, and white stayed above. Oftentimes what we see is the cross back below of white. So does that mean it's completely out of the woods? No. It just means we may see more of what we expected here, which is a lot of back and forth. That 23% is going to have to break, and you're going to have to see the white move above in order to expect a move yet to that 0%. And it's just part of that back and forth with the uncertainty, the easing of tensions with Russia, make a lot of people feel a little bit better, but it's not going to change the inflationary tone. So then it just becomes a question now. Everyone's going to be speculating Fed. For the NASDAQ, even easier. Again, that 23%, as we talked about, was the pivot point, and that adjustment makes it pretty simple to keep following that one. From a euro standpoint, a little bit of a pop. Now that's the kind of reversal I was talking about, where you get that strong dip of white back towards the red. Almost a pivot, but again, almost looks identical to the market set up and supported off the 50% at this particular stage. The euro's got other issues to deal with, as far as it's just a question of the dollar strength versus weakness. Gold filling back that positive extreme from the pop out to the previous highs right there. It's still going to continue to power. It's just going to take breathers here and there. Nothing too dramatic from that standpoint. Oil easing off. It's got quite a few positive extremes to fill back. It filled in the second set right there, and that one previously had already been filled, and these had already been taken care of with the repeated lows coming to them. You have to go all the way back to the early, but that's not going to really be a strong play until, well, cyan gets back above that. Steel gets above that zero level there, and it'll be interesting to see the play of green and cyan right at this particular stage, because you still have extremely high red DOC, and that rarely fades off too dramatically. When you see this kind of low movement, you got to have that cross of the red with the white, and could take place fairly soon. We'll see. With tensions easing, it may make people feel a little bit more comfortable, but at the end of the day here, we go back to bonds and new highs for rates. So as that continues to put, that just adds to the pressure against the Fed, because that's the market deciding that interest rates are rising, and now over the 2% number. Again, you're going to reach this threshold where you start to flip between safety and security of treasuries versus holding on to volatile stock assets. So that becomes a marginal play where things start to flip, and we'll see that with flows of money will start to change, and see some additional weakness within setups. But of course, there's still buybacks that are taking place, and every time we get these little dips, people have bought the dip for a decade. There's no reason not to, until you get a significant signal that says otherwise. I wouldn't call what we saw there buy configuration yet, but just more of just the volatility range that we've been seeing is pretty impressive. Bitcoin, nice buy right down at the bottom level right there, the 42.6 range, and it went ahead and took the gain at 44.05. And from an ETH, once the buy took place, it just kept powering up. A couple little soft readings, but they weren't able to sustain. So it's every time the soft signal came in, you ended up with the magenta tipping back up. Then even when it had a little bit of a run, magenta took back over and really didn't go anywhere from there. So we get the white spike, and that just left open any cross below as an opportunity to look for a move towards the 0% at that stage. In this case, the zero, though, was rising pretty fast, so it didn't give as big a range play as we've seen before. 50K, well, that was from the other day. I had the green buy setup configuration, and pretty much once it got above that 44.35, just traded right across that 76%, which is pretty close to where that algo level already was. And what was the low bar? It was right in here. Came down to 36, so right on it. And intraday, I mean, pretty much the action was kind of over early. Pre-market flipped around to the buy early, normal for European time, and just took off from there. Once we did get some sells, what I did was I marked, obviously we started with the first positive extreme, and then that secondary range, which was midway through, and the extra little higher ones had already been filled at that particular point. So when we got some sells, there was the potential, but every time it started to go, we ended up with that magenta turning it around. And then steel, of course, crossing above. Cyan, always a little bit bullish with those pops. It's just a question of whether it can sustain it. In this case, kind of went across for a while until it was clear once the magenta crossed back above. And it was right about there before it turned green. And then we did the same thing again. Just took a little bit longer for it to break down. We had the start right there of the close below, which is why it's that rose color. And then the eventual cross was right here, which literally gave it right at the 52 range. And that one dipped pretty reasonable down into the 39s. I mean, that's still pretty good range, even though it looks kind of tiny. That's just because of the size of the day. And that just became a range setup where we were just peaking. Sell signals would come in, you buy setup configuration back to 100%, and that kept things interesting because there was still good sized movement, because when you're getting that sell there right at the 58 and that's dropping all the way down to 37, that's a reasonable amount of pointage to profit from, which was nice. And then turn around again with that magenta, working on making the adjustment for that one to flip over on those, because you can see the end of our dots. And even with the purple ones, because red is rising above that particular stage, and there's no steel reset except for the fact it moves above 13, and we had that orange dip, and that was enough to give it the boost. And it's interesting, when we see those, we still get plays back and forth, so usually there's a bar to get opportunities to turn around if you hadn't covered already, and or on the 23% move, enter for the long setup, and made some nice traction going back. But again, those sells soft when you don't get that, when you get that white MBI with the magenta coming down, and it doesn't cross over, and you get the pivot back up. That's usually what happens. It's just a turnaround setup. And then it came across, and then the early setup was right there. The reason it doesn't flip is because the white didn't cross over, but the magenta had clearly moved under 33 as well as so had the yellow under orange. Even a little bit later would have dipped down below the 25. It's also clean, it wasn't too far off price, and also just below that previous algo, and it took a nice little ride down lower. And again, red was leading on this one. There was some potential with that it would fade, but the magenta got above, which is a turnaround signal, which is why you see some of those back and forth bars. It's just the magenta had never faded from there, and as long as it stayed above, and once it crossed back above the white, you knew that there's pretty good likelihood that was going to continue, and it did all the way towards the end. But it kind of broke down a few times in between, every time it was dipping down there, but there's always that nightmare setup from a short standpoint when it just kind of flat lines across there, and you get the red pivoting back above it, and that's exactly what it did there until later in the day, right before the close, and nice clean breakdown from that one all the way to the 50% range. And that's where we leave it. As always, though, I'll keep updating you on the Skype chat and let you know where things are at. Trade well. We'll talk to you later.